The reading of my grandfather's will was scheduled for a Saturday morning in November, and my father's new wife spent the entire drive up to Asheville making sure I knew I wasn't welcome. She didn't say it directly. That wasn't her style. She said it through small things. The way she angled her body toward the passenger window when I climbed into the back seat. The way she talked to my father in a low, careful voice about keeping things simple today. The way she glanced at me in the rearview mirror and then looked away. Like I was a problem she hadn't finished solving yet. Her name was Darlene. My father had married her 14 months earlier, in a small ceremony at a vineyard outside Charlottesville that I wasn't invited to until 4 days before the date. I found out later that my grandfather hadn't been invited at all. Grandpa Walt had lived alone in the same house on Merriweather Lane since 1987, a white colonial with green shutters and a garden my grandmother had planted before she passed, which he still maintained himself well into his late 70s. He made his own coffee every morning, mowed his own lawn, drove himself to the grocery store on Tuesdays and the hardware store on Fridays. He was not a man who needed managing. He was not confused or feeble or any of the things Darlene had started suggesting at family dinners in the months before he died. He passed in September, congestive heart failure. He'd been diagnosed 8 months earlier and had told no one except his attorney, and I found out later, me in a letter that arrived at my apartment 3 weeks after his funeral, postmarked the week of his diagnosis. I'll come back to that letter. I'm a paralegal. Have been for 6 years working mostly in estate and probate law. I know what financial elder abuse looks like. I know the paperwork it leaves behind. I know the gap between what a person says they want and what appears in a document signed on a day when their blood pressure medication had just been doubled and their daughter-in-law was the only other person in the room. I had been watching Darlene for almost a year before my grandfather died. It started with the checking account. My grandfather had always sent me a birthday card with a check inside, $50, same as every year since I was old enough to have a bank account. It was a running joke between us. He'd write "adjust for inflation" in the memo line and never actually adjust it, and I loved him for that. My 29th birthday came and went, no card. I called him and he seemed confused when I mentioned it, said he was sure he'd mailed it, told me to check with the post office. 2 weeks later he mentioned casually that he'd switched banks. Darlene helped me simplify things, he said. Joint account. Easier for everyone. I wrote that down. Date, time, exact words. I have a habit from work. Then there was the car. His 2019 Camry disappeared from the driveway at Merriweather Lane sometime in August of last year. When I asked, my father said Grandpa Walt had decided he was too old to drive and had sold it privately. When I ran the plate through a DMV lookup, a favor from a colleague, the car had been transferred to Darlene's sister in Knoxville. No record of a sale price, no bill of sale in the county records. I wrote that down too. The house on Merriweather Lane had been paid off since 2003. My grandfather had mentioned it to me once, almost offhand, when I was in law school and complaining about student loans. At least I don't have that hanging over me anymore, he'd said. Your grandmother and I paid every last cent. So when a home equity line of credit appeared on a title search I ran in July, taken out in March of that year, I sat very still at my desk for a long time. $80,000. Against a house that appraised at $412,000. The HELOC had been opened 3 weeks after Darlene and my father returned from a 10-day trip to Cancun. My grandfather had a signature on that application. I had samples of his handwriting going back 30 years, birthday cards, Christmas cards, a letter he'd written me when I graduated college that I keep in a box under my bed. The signature on the HELOC didn't curve the way his did. The capital W was wrong. The loop in the A was wrong. I hired a handwriting consultant through the firm where I work. She agreed with me, in writing, in a report dated August 14th. I didn't say anything to my father. I didn't say anything to Darlene. I made copies of everything, kept them in a fireproof box at my apartment, and I waited. I wasn't sure what I was waiting for until the letter from my grandfather arrived. He had written it by hand on his personal stationery, the cream-coloured kind with his initials at the top. It was 7 pages long. He told me about his diagnosis. He told me he was not afraid. He told me he was sorry he hadn't said any of it out loud, that he'd been trying to protect me from worrying, and that he understood now that he'd miscalculated. He told me he'd updated his will in February, with his attorney, alone, without telling my father or Darlene. He told me where the original was. He told me what was in it. Then he wrote, in his careful, slightly slanted handwriting, "I know what's been happening, sweetheart. I'm not as easy to fool as they think. I just needed time to get everything in order. Trust Harold. He'll know what to do." Harold was his attorney. Harold Bemis of Bemis and Callaway in downtown Asheville. I had called Harold the morning after I read that letter. He had been expecting my call. So when my father called me in October to tell me the will reading had been scheduled, and Darlene got on the phone to tell me, sweetly, that it was really just a formality, there's not much to go over. You don't have to make the drive if it's too much trouble. I told her I wouldn't miss it for the world. The offices of Bemis and Callaway were on the 4th floor of a building on Lexington Avenue, one of those old brick buildings that Asheville has somehow managed to keep standing through decades of development pressure. Harold had been my grandfather's attorney for 22 years. He was 64, compact, with wire-rimmed glasses and the particular stillness of a man who had heard everything and been surprised by very little. When I walked in that Saturday morning, Harold was already at the conference table. My father was there, in the chair closest to the door, in the way he sat when he wanted to leave quickly, back straight, hands on his knees, ready. Darlene was beside him in a cream blazer, her nails done in a French manicure, a leather portfolio open in front of her like she was running a meeting. There were 2 chairs across the table, one for me, one that Harold had placed there, he said, for a guest. "What guest?" my father asked. "Someone your father-in-law requested be present," Harold said, and opened the door to the adjoining room. Her name was Agent Cecily Marsh. She was with the North Carolina Department of Justice, Financial Crimes Division. She was 38, maybe 40, in a grey blazer, and she sat down next to me with the particular calm of someone who had done this before. Darlene's eyes went to the portfolio in front of her, then to Harold, then to Agent Marsh, then to the wall somewhere to the left of my head. "This is unexpected," she said. "Your husband's father anticipated that," Harold said pleasantly, "and opened the will." My grandfather had been clear and precise, the way he was about everything. The house on Meriwether Lane went to me, outright, with no conditions. His investment accounts, which I had not known existed until that morning, a separate Vanguard portfolio he had never mentioned, totaling just over $310,000, were to be divided equally between me and a wildlife conservation fund he had supported for 30 years. His personal property, including the furniture, the tools in his workshop, the garden equipment, and the contents of the locked cedar chest in his bedroom closet, went to me. His car, he noted in a separate clause, had been taken without his consent, and he expected the estate to pursue its return or equivalent value. He had left my father a single item, a framed photograph of the 2 of them from 1987, the year the house was bought, the year everything was still possible. He had left Darlene nothing. She had known this was coming, or some version of it. I could tell by the way she didn't react, too carefully, too still. The kind of stillness that is its own form of movement. My father put his hands flat on the table and looked at them. "The HELOC," she said finally to Harold, "the home equity line, that was properly authorized." "It was not," Harold said. "A forensic document examiner has reviewed the signature on the application and found it inconsistent with your father-in-law's known handwriting samples across a 30-year period. That report has been provided to Agent Marsh's office." "He was elderly," Darlene said. "His handwriting." "His handwriting was consistent until the week he died," Harold said. "He wrote me a 3-page letter in August. His signature is identical to every sample going back to 1991. Agent Marsh opened a folder. She did not look up. "Miss Kovacs," she said, using Darlene's name, "we'll need you to come in for a voluntary interview. If you'd prefer to have an attorney present, which I'd recommend, please have them contact our office by Wednesday." Darlene looked at my father. My father was still looking at his hands. I had thought about this moment, not obsessively, but I had thought about it. I had wondered if I would feel something sharp and victorious, the way you imagine feeling when you're in the middle of being wronged and you picture the moment it stops. But sitting there in that fourth-floor conference room with the November light coming through the windows and Harold closing his folder with a quiet click, what I felt was mostly tired. And underneath the tired, something that took me a minute to name. It was grief. It was just grief. My grandfather had known, and he had spent the last months of his life carefully, methodically protecting what he'd spent 60 years building. He'd done it without drama, without confrontation, without a single phone call to me that would have made it harder. He'd done it the way he did everything, quietly, completely, with more foresight than anyone gave him credit for. "You were right," I said to Harold after Darlene and my father had left separately, which told me something. He wasn't easy to fool. "No," Harold said. He called me in February and said, "Harold, I need you to help me make sure she can't touch any of it." And then he told me exactly what he'd found out and what he wanted to do about it. He paused. "He also said to tell you he was proud of you, that you'd been doing your homework, and he was glad you'd noticed." The house on Merriweather Lane still has my grandmother's garden in the back. The roses she planted in 1991 are overgrown and need to be cut back, and there's a section of the fence my grandfather had been meaning to replace for 2 years. The kitchen still has the same linoleum it had when I was a child, and the coffee maker is an older model that takes a full 4 minutes to brew a pot and makes the best coffee I've ever had in my life. I drove up the week after the reading with a change of clothes and my laptop and a spare key Harold had given me at the end of the meeting. I sat in my grandfather's kitchen and drank his coffee and looked out the window at the garden, and I let myself cry for a while, which I hadn't done properly since he died. Darlene's interview with the Financial Crimes Division happened the following Thursday. My father's attorney contacted Harold the week after that, requesting a copy of the HELOC documentation. The civil recovery process is slow. It will probably take the better part of a year. But the $80,000 drawn against this house before my grandfather died will come back to his estate, and his estate is mine to protect, and I intend to do exactly that. The car turned up in Knoxville, still titled in Darlene's sister's name. My attorney has sent a demand letter. My father has not called me. I don't know what to do with that, or whether there is anything to do with it at all. He sat at that table and looked at his hands. And somewhere in the years between the man in that 1987 photograph and the man in Harold's conference room, something had shifted in him that I don't think I can shift back. I'm not sure I have the energy to try. That might make me cold. It might just make me honest. What I know is this: my grandfather planted the idea of me in this house long before I knew the house would be mine. He paid attention. He kept records. He understood in his quiet and thorough way that love is not just a feeling, it's a series of choices made in advance of the moment they're needed, so that when the moment comes, the person you love doesn't have to fight for what's already theirs. He was 81 years old and he outmaneuvered everyone in that room, and he did it so cleanly that the only thing left for me to do was show up and receive it. I think about that a lot. I think about what it means to love someone that carefully, with that kind of patience and precision. I think about the letter under my bed, all 7 pages of it, and the line near the end where he wrote, "Don't let anyone make you small to make themselves feel bigger. You come from people who build things. Remember that." I remember, Grandpa. I remember. I keep coming back to the coffee maker. It's an old Mr. Coffee, the kind you can't find in stores anymore, with a cracked handle on the carafe that my grandfather wrapped in electrical tape sometime around 2015 and never replaced. It takes 4 minutes to brew a full pot. I've timed it. And every morning I stand in that kitchen on Merriweather Lane and watch it and think about the kind of person who wraps a broken handle in electrical tape instead of throwing the whole thing out. Someone who doesn't discard things just because they've gotten a little harder to hold. That's what I keep coming back to. Not the HELOC, not the forged signature, not the moment Agent Marsh opened her folder. Those things matter, and they're being dealt with, slowly and correctly. But what stays with me is the man himself, the patience of him, the precision. My grandfather knew what was happening in his own house. He wasn't confused. He wasn't failing. He was watching and recording and waiting until the moment was right. And then he called his attorney and he wrote me a 7-page letter by hand, and he made sure that everything he'd spent 60 years building would land exactly where he intended it to land. He did all of that while managing a heart failure diagnosis alone, without telling anyone, without asking for anything. I think about what that takes. Not just the planning, though the planning was meticulous. I mean what it takes in a person. The internal architecture of someone who responds to being wronged, not with rage or collapse, but with clarity. He didn't confront Darlene. He didn't call my father. He didn't make accusations he couldn't prove. He got quiet and he got careful, and he got it done. There's something in that I'm still trying to learn. I work in probate law. I see what people do to each other over money and property and the ghosts of family expectations, and I've spent years thinking that the answer is to be smarter, faster, better documented than whoever's coming for you. And that's part of it. It was certainly part of what my grandfather taught me. But watching how he handled it, I think the deeper thing was integrity, not as a concept, as a daily practice. He lived in a way that made the truth easy to find when it needed to be found. His records were clean because his life was clean. His signature was consistent because he never needed to be anyone other than who he was. I had to do my part too. The months of running title searches, pulling DMV records, hiring a handwriting consultant, keeping my mouth shut when every instinct said to confront. That required something I didn't know I had until I needed it. Staying the course when you can't yet see the outcome. Trusting the process when the process is slow and unglamorous and nobody knows you're doing it. That kind of endurance is quieter than people think. It doesn't look like strength from the outside. It just looks like showing up. And I think that's the thing about the people who raised you well. They don't just love you, they model something. My grandfather showed me without ever explaining it that character is what you do when no one is watching and nothing is certain. He showed me that being right isn't enough. You have to be prepared. You have to be patient. You have to be the kind of person whose word and whose signature and whose life can hold up under scrutiny. Darlene bet that I wouldn't know what to look for. She was wrong. She bet that my grandfather wouldn't see it coming. She was wrong about that too. The roses in the back garden need cutting back. I'm going to do it this weekend, the way he would have. Carefully, early in the morning, before it gets too warm.